Welcome to Tracing Your Family Roots. My name is Arlene Sachs. This is Sally Ann Sachs. And today we'd like to welcome Thomas Jones. And Sally's going to give a little bit of an introduction.
Well, okay, Tom and actually it's Professor Tom Jones from Gallaudet, but we're not talking about Gallaudet today. We're talking about the other side of your activities. Right. Tom and I met this fall, it's in September, in Jerusalem at this symposium that the new International Institute on Jewish Genealogy had organized, and his task for that was to talk about whether genealogy met the criteria to be an academic study. And I thought today we wouldn't focus exactly on that, but that given your expertise, and it's vast, and I believe you're the editor of this journal, yes, the National Genealogical Society Quarterly, and not only that, you also teach at the prestigious Samford University Institute on Genealogical and Historical Research. Samford is in Alabama.
Right,
It's
Birmingham.
without the T. It's not Stamp. Right. And which makes you really at the center of the serious business of genealogy. And I wanted you to share that with us today. What is genealogy? How does it proceed? How do you become a genealogist? Anywhere.
Big question.
Okay.
What genealogy is, I think, depends on the person. Okay. There are many people doing genealogical research who take it in many different directions. I think the thread or the theme that ties it all together is what I would call transgenerational kinship. That genealogists try to establish relationships between people in different generations. And generally, most of us want to work back as far as we can on all the lines we can. But some people take an ancestral couple, and try to trace all of their descendants forward. But either way, it's that kinship across generations that I think ties genealogy, what genealogists do together. And
what are your specific goals in working?
As a professional genealogist, my goal is in the area of education, really. I look on myself as a genealogical educator. I want to help genealogists develop the skill set they need to succeed, to trace more ancestors, to solve problems, to learn more about the ancestors they've already discovered.
You know, the fact that Samford University sponsors this institute tells me that this academic establishment considers the enterprise a serious business. What exactly is that institute? What do you do there?
It meets for a week during the summer. Every year there are maybe a dozen courses that are each course focused on a different specialized topic. And they range from courses for beginners to an advanced methodology course. There's a course on legal resources for genealogists. There are courses on different geographic areas. There are courses on genealogical research in different European countries, and a course on Virginia research. There are some courses that meet every summer, others are cyclical, every 2 summers, every 3 summers, so there's a lot of variety. There are people who go to Samford every year and never take the same thing twice. Oh, wow. There's that much variety. As I said, it's for a range of skill levels. They do have a course every summer for people who are pretty much beginners. The students sit in class for, I would say, 5 to 8 hours a day for 5 days a week. So they focus very in depth on whatever the subject of the course is. They have the resources of the Samford University Library, which has a very strong genealogical collection to work with. Some of the courses also take the students out into the field to do work in courthouses.
Has this been going on a long time?
I would say close to 40 years.
Oh, really? I had no idea.
I had no idea about it.
But you've been doing that maybe close to, you said you began when you were a teenager?
I began doing genealogical research when I was in high school, about the same time the Samford Institute started.
What got you started?
I don't really know. I was born interested, that's for sure. And I would ask my mother my father died when I was fairly young, when I was 12, and I asked my mother about her family, and she'd say she didn't know anything. And I finally pinned her down and filled several pages of my notebook with all the things she didn't know.
And you said that you told us before the show started that you came across this early on in your career,
Yeah.
the NGS Quarterly, and that it was very important. Why was it important?
Because it opened my eyes to a different way of looking at genealogy. Up until that time, first 10, 15 years of my experience, I was pretty much what they call a name collector. I was looking for the right names, I was looking for my ancestors, but I was really looking for records that had these names in them that I thought were my ancestors and putting that together. What this journal taught me was how to get below the surface of those records. And it also taught me about a lot of records that I didn't even know about.
What do you mean, get below the surface?
Well, for example, there's one article in here that we published a couple of years ago that was a situation with a family that migrated from South Carolina to Alabama and were in a county that had a burned courthouse. There were really no records, courthouse records in that county. They came from South Carolina, where they didn't start keeping vital records until the 20th century.
Truly?
And this was a
I didn't know that.
The U.S. is worse than the
This was really a post-revolutionary war problem that they were trying to work on. They got the researchers, it was two women, got some bits of information from the family, about the family, from the newspaper that had survived. And with that information, with a couple of family interviews and studying the laws in Alabama about inheritance, they were able to reconstruct 3 generations of the family.
Oh, that's interesting.
Even though no record said that person A was the child of person B, who was the child of person C, once you put all of those pieces together and interpreted it with what the law said about how property was inherited, there was only one answer.
Oh, that's marvelous.
It's like putting together a jigsaw puzzle with a lot of pieces missing, but you still get a picture that makes sense.
Well, I think that's to a great extent what we do too.
Well-
because we're not using the regular
Well, what I'm thinking is, we are, but we mostly aren't doing Revolutionary War United
No.
States, which is, I was getting ready to say to you, what's the value of a journal that contains nothing about my family?
Well, I can give you another example, too.
Okay.
What I learned from this journal about Southern research, I applied in Ireland, where my ancestors were tenant farmers. They were never landowners. There were no vital records at this time, no probate records applicable to people of their social standing. All I had really to work with were lists of names, lists of tenants, lists of taxpayers, lists of voters. But again, I was able to use this methodology of getting below the surface, arranging pieces until I had a picture that made sense. There were no pieces left over. There were holes in the puzzle, but there was no other way it would fit together. And I was able, again, to take this Irish family, these poor Irish tenant farmers, from the early 1800s back to the early 1700s.
That's excellent. I'm noticing you brought us some quotes that I like. Elizabeth Shown Mills, who's also one of the leaders, I think, in NGS, or just in genealogy, maybe in the United
I would
States.
call her the foremost genealogist today.
Okay, then let's read this. Genealogy is an interdisciplinary study of the development of individual families across generations, analyzing the dynamics of ethnicity, intermarriage, status, and migration in economic, legal, and social contexts. Otherwise, the practice of genealogy as a field of history following the precepts of peer-reviewed scholarship. So she very much says it's not just lists of names.
That's right.
And it's what do you do with this? How do you understand it? So as the editor of this quarterly, what kind of articles are you looking for?
We are looking for case studies that are grounded in original records, not compilations of other people's work. Well documented. You can turn to any page and see, half dozen footnotes, very well documented with original sources. But beyond that, what our readers want is something that will help them with their research. So the studies that we publish are case studies that are illustrating techniques, methods, and records that other genealogists can apply to their own problems. Chances are that no reader is going to pick this up and find information about their family.
Right.
And that's really not the point of it, of these articles about other people's families. The point is the methodology that these people used. I'm looking now at an article where someone identified a slave, separated her from, I think it was 15 other people, other slaves with the same name, given name, no surnames, in Louisiana.
Oh.
And that methodology could be applied in lots of situations.
You're talking about methodologies and skills. What are some of the skills that a good genealogist needs, do you think?
I divide them into three broad areas. I think there's content knowledge that's needed. You need to know what the records are that are available. You need to know a lot about the geographical context of where your ancestors lived, how the boundaries changed, what the different levels of jurisdictions are, national, provincial or state, county, local level, village, the religious levels as well, because records are created at all of these different levels. Mm-hmm. You need to understand the laws that affected your ancestors, laws of inheritance, of property ownership, of different kinds of civil rights. For women and men, often they were very different. And because understanding that helps you interpret the records and understand what they're telling you about your ancestor. And then the fourth knowledge area would be the social knowledge, the customs, the religion, the commerce of the areas where the ancestors lived. So that would be the content knowledge. The second area would be what I would call skills, the application, which is sort of across the board for all genealogists. It would include planning research, people who do their genealogical research very haphazardly aren't as likely to succeed as someone who sets objectives and goes about it very systematically. So that's one part of the skill set. Another part of the skill set is data collection, getting all you can out of the records that you're examining, understanding what's important and not important, and making sure that you don't overlook anything important. And that leads to the third part of the skill set, which is the evaluation of evidence, knowing what is more likely to be reliable or not. Fourth is using that evidence to develop conclusions about who ancestors were, about their identities, about their relationships to other people. And then the fifth area of the skill set, the performance competencies, is compilation, being able to write it up, put it together for someone else to use. All genealogists do genealogy for someone else. I don't think any family historian would be happy to know that after they were gone, their work would be destroyed.
Yes, this is so true.
You know,
I just hope your kids are interested enough to
We
look
all
at
do it for someone else, and so part of the skills is putting it in a form that will be useful and meaningful to other people. And then the third broad area, aside from the knowledge and the skills, is ethics. And that's how to relate to other people, to respect other people's work, how to share information, and knowing what to keep confidential.
Very good. And all of this is part of what goes on at the Sanford Institute?
All of that's covered at Sanford. You can learn a lot of that from this quarterly and national conferences. There are really a variety of educational opportunities for genealogists.
When you talk about learning this from the quarterly, my sense is that you learn it, how shall I say, it's not taught didactically. It's taught, I can't think what the word, it's example. You have to abstract actively for yourself what's...
More than other, this is a scholarly journal, but more than the other scholarly journals in genealogy, this historically has had a didactic component. And you will see in these articles explanations of how the genealogist did it. But you're right, it's mostly teaching by example.
Okay.
Well, in a way, opportunity does it.
Well, we sort of do, actually, Gary Mokotov, who's my partner in Avotino, keeps saying, Jewish genealogists don't know about methodology. And I'm sitting and listening to you. I don't know about you, but I was feeling slightly overwhelmed by the orderliness of what you were saying.
Well, most genealogists don't know about methodology.
Oh.
And you go to national conferences and you look at the program, and it's presentation after presentation on records and sources.
Yes.
And very little on what you do with them and how to put it together.
Yeah, we need something on how to put it together, but I think when you're doing European, there's so much that's missing that when somebody finds some new kind of record, unlike the United States, you can say, well, there's probate records. Who knows if they're probate records for this town in wherever,
but
how do you get them? Or where do you find them?
That situation is when you need methodology the most.
Yeah. Go ahead. Why?
Because that helps you see what's not there. It helps you fill in the gaps when you're putting this puzzle together and you've got these pieces and you can see what the holes are, then you have a better idea of what the picture is.
Yeah.
It's the best way to explain it. And that's what methodology is working with those pieces and getting as much out of them as you can.
It's being systematic, I think, is one of the things that always bothers me is when somebody says, well, I'm descended from the Baal Shem Tov. I say, well, that's fine. Do you know how you're descended from the Baal Shem Tov? Well, no. And they want to rush off.
You better tell them to say well, who Baal Shem Tov is.
Baal Shem Tov was the father of modern Hasidic Jewry. Okay. Very famous name.
When? Mid
1700s, I think. Yeah. And I say, well, you know, really the only way is you start with yourself and you go to your parents and you go to your grandparents and you go generation by generation, or you're going to end up just mushing around getting nowhere, you know, trying to show that you're related to this famous person, I think is a fool's errand, unless somebody has done a whole descendancy business from the famous premise.
And if you can trust that they did it accurately.
Oh, that's the other nightmare, the fear that you're going to put into print somewhere something that's totally wrong and other people are going to build off of it.
Well, I've built on something that was every document for 100 years, and somebody in Israel just proved that that's wrong.
Yes.
It's all based on an article from 1867, and every encyclopedias, everything has picked up from that article. And he said, part of it is make-believe, and the guy didn't have 2 children, he had 6 children, or, whatever. It's the same thing.
So basically, if you don't go down to Sanford and you want to become a proficient genealogist, an ethical genealogist, how do you go about acquiring these skills? What's the best way in knowledge?
Subscribing to this journal or joining the National Genealogical Society is one way. And the Society does on its website,
which we will put up on our screen.
Yeah. Do you want to? We have a bunch of websites here, and rather than the National Genealogy Society is one. Rather than trying to put all of those web pages on the screen, just look at tracingroots.nova.org, which is our web page, and they will be listed, and you'll be able to link to the others. But do you want to briefly say what some of the other institutes are?
Okay, so one of the ways is joining the NGS.
Right.
Yeah, and you mentioned Sanford University.
While we're talking about NGS, I'll mention also the national conference that they have, which this year in 2007 will be in Richmond, Virginia. It's in different cities around the country every year in May or June, around that time of year. It's about 4 days of lectures during the day and in the evening on a variety of topics, including some on Jewish genealogy, really a very wide range of topics. The Federation of Genealogical Societies has a similar conference in the fall. So those are the 2 big national conferences that provide education. Sanford Institute we've talked about. The Salt Lake Institute of Genealogy is in January in Salt Lake City. It has a similar model as I've already described for Sanford. It's not quite as long, not a full week, but there are classes that are focused on topics, migration, genealogical compilation, range of topics. And then the National Institute for Genealogical Research is at the National Archives in June.
And it fills up fast.
It fills up fast, that's right. They usually open membership or registration I think it's in February, 1st of February, around that time, and it fills up within a couple of weeks. They're limited because of the space available in the National Archives.
And they do basically the same kind of thing?
They focus exclusively on National Archives records.
And
it's like it would be analogous to one course at Samford or at the Salt Lake Institute, rather than this wide variety of simultaneous courses.
I also see on this list that NGS has an online learning center. What's that?
They offer several courses on genealogy online. They also have a course, very well-respected and well-established course on genealogical research that is for beginners to intermediate level, that describes the sources and the methods and the ethics, the three areas that I talked about.
What do you find, what are some of the most common problems among genealogists who aren't well-grounded in all this stuff? What are the big mistakes we make?
In a word, I'd say gullibility. Yeah. And Donald Jacobus is sort of the founder of modern genealogy, the more disciplined approach to genealogy. In the 1930s, he developed this approach. And one of the things he said is that genealogists have to be skeptics, that you have to question everything and verify everything. And I think too many family historians are too eager to find ancestors that they just swallow hook, line, and sinker what they find in print or on the internet. And then their research is blocked and they don't understand that it's blocked because the person they think was their ancestor never existed.
Well, you know,
was the wrong one.
The thing that you're making me think of, though, I want to say, but also we were taught as children, you can't believe everything you read. So just because it's a document doesn't mean it's necessarily true, because we've all found documents that turned out later to have been created fraudulently. I mean, my own grandfather did it repeatedly.
Absolutely, there are lots of examples of that. I talk about a will in my family where the recorded copy names a daughter and two sons. The daughter never existed. The person copying the will into the will book misread the name. And the two, quote, sons were really his nephews that he wanted to ensure inherited his land. But he had 10 other children that weren't named in the will at all.
Oh, my God.
And you managed to learn all this?
Through looking at a lot of records and piecing it together, just like I've described. Another example, in my wife's family, one of her ancestors had 17 illegitimate children. And after the Civil War, it's a sordid story, but the relevant point is that a lot of these children, or their children, created fiction for their ancestry because they wanted to bury this situation.
Yes.
And about 2/3 of the records were incorrect. And it just goes to show that you have to be a skeptic. You have to verify everything that you look at.
But you know, you raised the ethics issue, and the ethics is something I wonder if we could spend just a few more minutes about. I, as you know, edit Avotena, which is the Jewish Genealogical Journal, and I received an article from a man in France who was born in Germany, who discovered relatives of his who were part Jewish. On the maternal grandmother's side, they had lived through the Hitler years in Germany. They are his second cousins. His father, the children of his father's first cousins, not terribly remote. And he managed to put together a family tree without not much difficulty. And he contacted them, and when he contacted them, it was very clear, though they didn't say it outright, that they really didn't welcome this. They really didn't want to explore it and wanted to bury it. And he was stuck with, what do I do with this part of my family tree? And he concluded that he was going to leave it off. And, you know, and he went on about how we Americans don't have sufficient sensitivity. Now, this man lived through the Hitler years himself. So his thing is, just because they're dead doesn't mean it's okay to publish stuff about them. How do you approach that kind of ethical question at Samford or any place else?
I approached it with this family with all the illegitimate children.
Yes.
And I waited until anyone who would be hurt by that information being published was no longer living. I think what our ethical responsibility as genealogists is, one of the responsibilities is not to create misleading information like these people did. Mm-hmm. So just leaving it out, as if people never existed who did, creates misleading information. We can't do that. But at the same time, we can't publish something that will hurt living people. That's also not ethical.
But yes, this man says, but the living, when I published that my grandmother's sister, who I do remember, was a bootlegger, and I know that from my own eyes, her great-granddaughter, the woman's long dead, her great-granddaughter was incensed. Why had I put that fact in? I didn't, was it hurting the great-granddaughter that I put it in? I suppose I didn't have to say that about her, but I like doing pictures of the people, not just their names. So, the question of who it's going to hurt can become also a difficult question.
Of course, and that's you could argue in that situation if she was really hurt or not, too.
Yes.
Yeah.
We're down to within our last minute, so if there's any last-minute things that you want to add that we haven't touched on, you've got about 30 seconds.
Well, I would just say that genealogy, like any serious pursuit, never ends. The learning curve, you're always climbing, you're always learning. I've been learning for 40 years, and the end is not in sight.
And you're still interested in it.
I'm fascinated.
Well, I think we all are, otherwise Sally Ann and I wouldn't have been doing this show for how many years. Thank you very much, Tom, for appearing today, and I think we've learned an awful lot and looked at it from a different point of view.
Exactly.
I think that we have been looking at it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now I'll have to look at your quarterly
My
again.
pleasure.